New York City, a world of power, wealth, and ruthless ambition. At the top of it all stands Adrian Montgomery, a billionaire CEO who has everything money can buy: fortune, influence, control. But beneath the polished exterior lies a man who trusts no one, who sees love as a weakness, and who has built walls so high that no one dares to climb them. Until Elena Ramirez crashes into his life. She is nothing like the women in his world, fiercely independent, unyielding, and caught in a desperate battle against a future she refuses to accept. When Adrian witnesses her being forced into a marriage for power and status, something inside him shifts. Against his better judgment, he steps in, offering her a deal that will change both their lives forever. A fake relationship, a dangerous game. Two people who should never have crossed paths. But as Adrian plays the role of her savior, he finds himself drawn to Elena in ways he never expected. And the more he tries to keep his heart locked away, the more she threatens to break through his defenses. What started as a cold-blooded transaction begins to feel terrifyingly real. But love was never part of the plan. And in a world where power is everything, falling for the wrong person comes at a cost. Will Adrian risk everything for the one thing he swore he'd never need? Or will his fear destroy the only chance he has at finding something money can't buy? One choice will change everything, and once the game begins, there's no turning back. Before we begin, let us know. What time are you listening to the story? And where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. New York City. A place where the skyline was lined with towering glass monoliths, where power and influence determined your worth. The city was alive, pulsing with energy. Yet for Adrian Montgomery, it had always been a world that felt strangely empty. Inside a lavish five-star hotel in Manhattan, the ballroom was filled with New York's elite, business magnates, celebrities, politicians, all gathered under glittering chandeliers for yet another high society gala. Adrian Montgomery stood near the bar, his presence commanding, yet detached. At 35, he had built an empire in real estate, controlling some of the most sought-after properties in the country. He was the type of man others either envied or feared, but admiration came at a price. No one saw him as a man, only as an asset. Nathan Pierce, his closest confidant and right-hand man, approached with a glass of whiskey in hand. "You look miserable," Nathan said with a smirk, passing him the drink. Adrian took it, but barely acknowledged his words. He wasn't miserable, not exactly. He just wasn't interested. These events were predictable. Fake smiles, shallow conversations, women who saw him as nothing more than a prize to be won. He had learned long ago that love was an illusion. People wanted what he had, not who he was. "Do you ever get tired of this?" Adrian finally spoke, his voice low and even. Nathan chuckled. "You mean watching billionaires pretend they care about the world while sipping champagne? Never." Adrian exhaled sharply through his nose. "It's all a game. They play their roles hoping to gain something. Nothing real." "Like you?" Nathan countered, tilting his head. "You play the game better than anyone." Adrian didn't respond. He had built walls around himself, each one carefully reinforced over the years. It was safer that way. As he took another sip of whiskey, his attention was drawn to a commotion near the entrance. A young woman, dressed elegantly but noticeably out of place in this crowd, was locked in an intense argument with an older man. Victor Ramirez, a name Adrian recognized. A businessman with deep political ties, someone who made deals in the shadows. And beside him, Elena Ramirez. She was striking, but it wasn't her beauty that caught Adrian's interest. It was the way she stood her ground, the fire in her eyes as she spoke, her voice tense with defiance. "I won't do it," she hissed, barely keeping her voice contained. "I don't care what you've arranged. I won't marry him." Victor's face darkened, his grip on her wrist tightening. "This is not a choice, Elena. You will do what is expected." Adrian observed, unmoving, yet something inside him stirred. He had seen countless business deals unfold, but this wasn't about money or power. This was something else. A forced marriage? In his world, relationships were often strategic. but watching a woman be treated as a bargaining chip, there was something about it that made his pulse tick faster. Lucas Delacroix entered the scene, his smug expression only adding to the tension. Adrian knew his type well, entitled, arrogant, and accustomed to getting whatever he wanted. "Elena," Lucas said smoothly, ignoring her clear resistance, "you're making this harder than it needs to be." She pulled her wrist free and glared at him. "I am not a business deal. I don't belong to you." Adrian swirled the whiskey in his glass, contemplating. This wasn't his problem. He had no reason to get involved. But when Elena turned her head for a brief second, their eyes met across the room. And in that moment, Adrian saw something that cut through his usual indifference. Desperation. A silent plea. For the first time in years, Adrian Montgomery felt something shift inside him. Elena took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. The weight of her father's words still lingered, pressing on her chest like an iron grip. She had to get out of here. She had to leave before things escalated even further. As she turned on her heel, determined to make an escape, a firm hand caught her wrist. "Elena." Lucas Delacroix's voice was smooth, almost amused, but there was a dangerous edge beneath it. "You're being irrational. Do you really think you can walk away from this?" She yanked her arm back, her heart pounding. "Let me go, Lucas." But Lucas wasn't the type to let things slip through his fingers so easily. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hushed but threatening tone. "Your father and I have an agreement. Whether you like it or not, you're a part of that deal." Elena's stomach twisted in disgust. "I am not a business transaction." Lucas only smiled, a cold, calculating smirk that sent a chill down her spine. "That's where you're wrong." Before she could lash out, another voice cut through the tense air, deep and unwavering. "She told you to let her go?" Elena turned sharply, her breath catching as she saw Adrian Montgomery standing a few feet away, his expression unreadable, yet his presence alone sent a ripple of unease through the room. Lucas let out a quiet laugh, unbothered. "And what exactly do you think you're doing here, Montgomery?" "This has nothing to do with you." Adrian didn't flinch. He took a slow step forward, his gaze locking onto Lucas's with quiet intensity. "It does now." Elena glanced between them, confused but too shaken to interrupt. She didn't know what game Adrian was playing, but something about the way he stood, calm, confident, completely in control, made her feel like she could breathe, just for a moment. Lucas arched an eyebrow, unimpressed. "You're making a mistake, Montgomery. She's not worth it. Just another bargaining chip in her father's empire." Elena clenched her fists at Lucas's words, but Adrian showed no visible reaction. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if considering something. Then, in a voice so casual it almost seemed rehearsed, he made an offer that stunned everyone in the room. "Elena is not part of your deal," he said smoothly, "because she already belongs to me." A silence fell over them. Elena's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time, Lucas looked genuinely surprised. "Excuse me?" Lucas scoffed, his expression hardening. Adrian barely blinked. "She's with me now." Elena's pulse pounded in her ears. "What?" She turned to him, eyes wide, searching for an explanation. But Adrian didn't look at her. His entire focus was on Lucas, as if he was issuing a challenge. Lucas let out a disbelieving chuckle, shaking his head. "You expect me to believe that?" Adrian finally glanced at Elena, his gaze steady. "Believe whatever you want, but as of now, Elena is under my protection. You, Victor, and anyone else who thinks they can dictate her life, will have to deal with me." Elena's breath hitched. This was insane. Whatever Adrian Montgomery was doing, he was putting himself between her and a man who had no problem using power to get what he wanted. And yet, a small part of her, a foolish, desperate part, felt a flicker of relief. Lucas's smile faltered for the first time. He studied Adrian, trying to gauge whether he was bluffing. Adrian, as always, remained unreadable. After a long pause, Lucas exhaled sharply and took a step back. "Fine," he muttered, his eyes flashing with irritation. "Have it your way, Montgomery. But this isn't over." Without another word, He turned and disappeared into the crowd. Elena's body tensed as she watched him leave, still half expecting him to come back. When she finally turned to Adrian, her voice was a mixture of confusion and disbelief. What the hell was that? Adrian exhaled slowly, slipping his hands into his pockets. That, he said coolly, was me solving your problem. Elena stared at him, her mind racing. You just told him I'm with you. Why? Adrian studied her for a moment before answering. Because it was the fastest way to get him off your back. Her heart pounded. And what exactly does that mean? It means, Adrian said, that for now, you and I have a deal. She shook her head. Number absolutely not. You don't have a choice. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the finality in it. Elena opened her mouth to argue, but then she remembered her father's words, the cold certainty in Lucas's eyes. She knew what would happen if she walked away now. Adrian saw the hesitation in her face and pressed on. If you agree to this, Lucas and your father won't be able to touch you. You'll be untouchable. She swallowed hard. And in return? You work for me, he said simply. For the next 6 months, you'll be my personal assistant. Elena stared at him, her mind racing. This was madness. But what choice did she have? After a long silence, she exhaled and nodded. Fine. A flicker of satisfaction crossed Adrian's face, though it was gone as quickly as it came. Elena knew she had just made a deal with the devil. Adrian leaned in slightly, his voice low enough for only her to hear. From now on, you belong to me, at least in the eyes of the world. She shivered, unsure whether it was from fear or something else entirely. The car ride to Adrian's penthouse was silent, save for the faint hum of the city outside. Elena sat stiffly in the passenger seat, arms crossed, staring out at the glowing skyline of Manhattan. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her chest. What had she just agreed to? Beside her, Adrian was as unreadable as ever, his attention fixed on the road, his expression betraying nothing. When the car finally pulled into an underground parking garage, the sleek elevator doors slid open, and Adrian motioned for her to step inside. Elena hesitated for just a second before following. The elevator shot up at an almost dizzying speed, and within moments the doors opened to a vast, breathtaking penthouse. She took a step inside, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire space, offering a stunning panoramic view of New York City. A modern fireplace flickered in the distance, but despite its beauty, the place felt cold. Not physically, it was temperature-controlled to perfection, but there was a lack of warmth, an emptiness that made it seem more like a high-end hotel suite than a home. Elena turned to Adrian, who had already removed his jacket and loosened his tie. He was watching her reaction carefully. "This is where you live?" she asked, her voice quiet. He nodded. "Yes." Her eyes flickered across the pristine surroundings. Immaculate furniture, shelves lined with books that looked like they had never been touched, a bar stocked with expensive liquor. Everything screamed wealth and power, yet there was no sign of life. No pictures, she murmured, more to herself than to him. Adrian's brows lifted slightly. "Excuse me?" She gestured around. No family photos, no personal touches. It doesn't feel like anyone actually lives here. A shadow crossed his expression, but it was gone in an instant. "I travel often. There's no point in clutter." Elena pressed her lips together. It wasn't clutter she was talking about. It was something deeper, something missing, but she let it go. Adrian walked over to the sleek, dark wooden desk in the corner and pulled out a document. He placed it in front of her, his voice crisp and businesslike. "This is our contract." Elena blinked, snapping back to reality. "You made a contract for this?" "Of course." She hesitated before stepping forward, her eyes scanning the neatly typed pages. There were 3 main rules, written as if they were just another business deal. Appear with Adrian at all major social events. Maintain complete confidentiality regarding this agreement. No emotional involvement. Elena's brows furrowed as she reread the 3rd rule. Her head snapped up. "What the hell is this?" she asked, pointing at the last condition. Adrian met her gaze without flinching. "It's exactly what it says. No falling in love." She let out a humorless laugh. "You actually put that in writing?" "Yes. That's ridiculous." "It's necessary." She crossed her arms. "Why?" Adrian's eyes darkened slightly. "Because I don't do love, Elena. This is just business." His words were sharp, final, like a door slamming shut. Something in her chest twisted, but she masked it with a smirk. "Well, that won't be a problem. Trust me, you're not exactly my type." Adrian didn't react, but there was something unreadable in his gaze as he watched her. Without another word, he slid a pen across the table. Elena stared at it for a long moment. Then, with a quiet sigh, she picked it up and signed her name. The deal was done. The next few days were a whirlwind. Adrian wasted no time in integrating her into his world. Their first public appearance together came sooner than she expected. He took her to his corporate headquarters, introducing her as his girlfriend. Elena had never been inside a place like Montgomery Holdings. The entire building was made of steel and glass, radiating the same kind of untouchable authority that Adrian carried. The moment they walked through the entrance, all eyes were on them. Whispers followed them down the hall. "That's her? Since when is Montgomery dating anyone?" "She's not what I expected." Elena kept her chin up, schooling her expression into one of quiet confidence, just as Adrian had instructed. She had to sell this. Adrian introduced her to Nathan Pierce, his right-hand man, who studied her with curiosity. "So you're the woman who tamed the untamable," Nathan mused, shaking her hand. She rolled her eyes. "Yeah, sure. That's me." Nathan chuckled. "Well, good luck. You're going to need it." Adrian shot him a look, and Nathan smirked but said nothing more. As days passed, Elena played her role well. She attended meetings, sat beside Adrian at dinners, and learned how to navigate the ruthless world of high society. But the more time she spent around Adrian, the more she noticed things she hadn't before. Like the way his jaw tensed whenever someone mentioned marriage, or how he always kept a careful distance from people, as if intimacy was something foreign to him. For someone so powerful, there was an unmistakable loneliness beneath the surface, and what unsettled her the most was that she started to care. She wasn't supposed to. This was a contract, a temporary arrangement. But then came the gala. Adrian had given her a dress, a deep emerald gown that fit her perfectly. As she stepped out of the bedroom, adjusting the delicate fabric, she felt his eyes on her. She turned, and for the first time saw something flicker in his expression. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a crack in his armor. Elena swallowed, feeling her heart pick up speed. She wasn't the only one fighting something. The ballroom shimmered with golden light, the air filled with the murmur of conversation and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. It was one of those extravagant gatherings where wealth and power intertwined, where the elite of New York moved effortlessly through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries masked by underlying business deals. Elena walked beside Adrian, her fingers curling slightly against the fabric of her dress. The emerald gown he had chosen for her made her feel elegant, but it did nothing to ease the anxiety bubbling inside her. She didn't belong here. Every glance in her direction felt scrutinizing. Every whispered word felt like it was about her. Adrian sensed her unease before she could even say a word. He leaned down slightly, his voice low and reassuring. "Just smile and trust me." She forced a breath, nodding ever so slightly. They moved deeper into the room, seamlessly fitting into the grand performance of the evening. Adrian carried himself as he always did, calm, confident, untouchable. And Elena? She tried to mirror him, to play the role expected of her. Then, as if the night wasn't already testing her patience, a familiar voice interrupted the air. Well, what do we have here?" Elena tensed instantly. Lucas Delacroix stood a few feet away, his smirk lazy, eyes gleaming with amusement. He looked as polished as ever, his expensive suit tailored to perfection, his posture relaxed, as if he owned the room. Adrian turned, his expression unreadable. Delacroix. Lucas took a slow sip of his drink before shifting his attention to Elena. I must say I'm surprised. You move on quickly, don't you? She clenched her jaw, refusing to take the bait, but Lucas wasn't done. And here I thought you wanted nothing to do with men like me. Rich, powerful, controlling. And yet, here you are. Elena's fingers twitched at her side, her pulse quickening. Lucas noticed. He always did. Adrian, however, remained still. When he finally spoke, his voice was even. If you have something to say, Lucas, say it. Lucas grinned. Oh, I just find it fascinating. You've never been one for relationships, Montgomery. Yet now, suddenly you're parading around with a woman who, just days ago, was engaged to me. The murmurs around them grew louder. Whispers of curiosity and speculation spread quickly through the room. Elena felt trapped. She had spent years resisting men like Lucas, men who thought they could manipulate her. Now, she was standing in a room full of people just like him, people who fed off of scandal, who would tear her apart the second they sensed weakness. Adrian must have noticed the way her breathing changed, the subtle shift in her stance. He moved closer, placing a warm hand against the small of her back. And then, before she could process what was happening, he turned toward her. There was no hesitation. Adrian Montgomery cupped her face with one hand, his fingers grazing her skin so lightly that it sent a shiver down her spine. And then, in front of everyone, he kissed her. Elena's body stiffened for a fraction of a second. She hadn't been expecting this. But as the warmth of his lips pressed against hers, something inside her faltered. Adrian wasn't rough. He wasn't forceful. The kiss was firm, but controlled, an act of dominance wrapped in an unexpected gentleness. He was proving a point, to Lucas, to the entire room. Yet, as the seconds stretched, something shifted. Elena felt herself lean in, just slightly. Her fingers brushed against his suit jacket, and she swore she felt him pause, as if he had noticed. Then, just as quickly as it happened, Adrian pulled away. His face was unreadable, but something flickered behind his eyes, something she couldn't quite place. The room had fallen completely silent. Lucas's smirk had vanished. Adrian looked at Elena for half a beat longer before finally turning back to Lucas. His voice was calm, almost amused. Anything else you'd like to say? Lucas clenched his jaw but said nothing. Elena swallowed, her heart still pounding. This was all an act. It was just for show. Wasn't it? Adrian Montgomery had always been a man of control. Every action, every word, every calculated move had been meticulously planned. Then why, as he stood there, did something feel off? He could still feel the warmth of her lips against his. It was just a show, wasn't it? The air between them had changed. Ever since the kiss at the gala, there was something different in the way Adrian looked at her. It wasn't obvious. He was far too controlled for that. But Elena felt it. A hesitation in his gaze, a slight shift in his body language, as if he was aware of her in a way he hadn't been before. And yet, he said nothing. The ride home had been silent. Adrian had barely acknowledged her, his focus fixed on the city lights flashing past the car window. Elena had stolen glances at him, trying to decipher the thoughts behind that impassive face. When they arrived at the penthouse, she hesitated at the door, turning to him. Are we going to talk about what happened tonight? Adrian's jaw tightened, his hand resting on the doorknob. There's nothing to talk about. She folded her arms. Nothing? He exhaled sharply, finally meeting her eyes. It was just a show, Elena. We did what we had to do. Her stomach twisted at the coldness in his voice. So that's all it was. Adrian's silence was her answer. She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. You know, for someone who claims to be a master of control, you sure looked affected. His expression darkened. Careful, Elena. She took a step closer, studying him. Was that kiss just for show, or was there something real in it? His eyes flickered with something she couldn't name, but it was gone before she could grasp it. I told you, this is just business. Don't overthink it. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to nod. Right, just business. She turned on her heel and walked to her room, closing the door behind her with more force than necessary. Adrian stood there for a long moment, staring at the space she had just occupied. Why did it feel like a lie? He loosened his tie, running a hand over his face. This was exactly why he had set rules, boundaries. And now, the lines between business and something else were beginning to blur. He needed to fix this. He needed distance. But the more he tried to push her away, the more he found himself drawn to her. The following days were tense. Adrian busied himself with work, avoiding unnecessary interactions with Elena. She, in turn, kept her distance as well, though he could feel her watching him at times. There was a quiet tension between them, one that neither of them dared to address. But the world wouldn't let them ignore it. A press conference was scheduled for the end of the week, one that required both of them to appear together. By the time they arrived at the venue, Elena had perfected the act. She smiled when needed, played the role expected of her. But she felt off balance, still unsettled by Adrian's behavior. The reporters fired questions, most of them predictable, about Adrian's company, his investments, their relationship. And then the inevitable came. A journalist in the front row leaned forward, microphone in hand. "Elena, how did you fall in love with Mr. Montgomery?" Elena's breath caught. She knew questions like this would come, but she hadn't prepared an answer. She turned slightly, looking at Adrian for guidance. But before she could say anything, he spoke first. "She fell in love with me the same way I fell in love with her. Unexpectedly." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Elena snapped her gaze to him, stunned. He was still playing the part, keeping up the illusion. But why did he say it like that? The room was silent for a second too long before the reporters erupted into excited murmurs, their cameras clicking wildly. Elena forced a smile, even as her mind raced. She knew it was a performance. She knew it meant nothing. So why did her heart feel like it had skipped a beat? And why did Adrian look at her for a second too long before turning away? As they left the stage, Adrian exhaled quietly, his fingers flexing at his side. This was getting dangerous. I need to stop this before it's too late. The penthouse was quiet when they returned, the only sound coming from the distant hum of the city below. The air between them was thick with something neither of them was willing to name. Adrian loosened his tie the moment they stepped inside, walking straight to the bar. He didn't usually drink much, not beyond a glass of scotch at business meetings, but tonight was different. Elena watched him pour himself a drink, the amber liquid swirling in his glass. There was something off about him, something restless. He hadn't spoken a word since they left the press conference. She hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. "You okay?" Adrian let out a low chuckle, though there was no humor in it. "Define okay." She folded her arms, studying him. "You seemed off tonight." He downed his drink in one smooth motion before pouring another. "I'm fine." But he wasn't. Elena had spent enough time around him now to recognize when he was lying. She watched as he leaned against the counter, his usual controlled demeanor slipping just enough for her to see the cracks beneath. He took another sip, and before she could stop herself, the question slipped from her lips. "Why do you push everyone away, Adrian? What are you so afraid of?" The moment the words were out, she saw something flicker in his eyes, something raw. His grip on the glass tightened, his jaw clenched. "That's none of your business." She didn't back down. "Maybe not, but I think you're lying to yourself if you believe your past doesn't affect you." He let out a sharp exhale, running a hand through his hair. "The past doesn't matter." Elena shook her head. "It always matters." For a moment he said nothing. Then, as if something inside him gave way, he spoke. "When I was younger, I made the mistake of believing in love." His voice was low, almost distant. "I fell for someone. I thought she loved me back." Elena felt her breath hitch at the quiet bitterness in his tone. "She didn't." He let out a dry laugh, but there was no amusement in it. She loved what I could give her. The security, the power, the money. Elena's heart clenched. So that's why you don't believe in love. Adrian looked at her then, something dark and guarded in his expression. Love is just another transaction, Elena. Everyone has a price. Anger flared in her chest. Not everyone is like that, Adrian, she said firmly. But you will never know, because you're too afraid to take the risk. He tensed at her words, his eyes narrowing. She didn't look away. She wasn't afraid of him, not like everyone else seemed to be. The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Then, in a move so unexpected that it sent a shiver down her spine, Adrian reached out. His fingertips brushed against her cheek, the touch feather-light. I don't want to be alone anymore, he murmured, barely above a whisper. The words were raw, slipping out before he could stop them. Elena's breath caught. For a fleeting second she saw something in his eyes, something vulnerable, something real. But just as quickly he stiffened. His hand dropped and he stepped back, his expression hardening once more. This can't happen. His voice was clipped, controlled. And then, without another word, he turned his back to her, retreating into the cold sanctuary of his own solitude. Elena stood there, her heart pounding, knowing that for the first time, Adrian Montgomery had let her see the man behind the mask. And he was terrified of it. Elena needed a break. After everything that had happened, the kiss at the gala, the press conference, and Adrian's strange behavior, she needed to step away from the overwhelming world of deception and hidden emotions. That was why she agreed to meet Diego. He was one of the few people in her life who had always been genuine. A friend from college, someone who had known her before she got tangled in this complicated arrangement with Adrian Montgomery. Diego was kind, thoughtful, and easy to talk to. He had pursued a career in medicine and now worked as a respected doctor in the city. When he called, suggesting they catch up over dinner, Elena didn't hesitate. She needed normalcy. She needed to remind herself that there was a world outside of Adrian's cold penthouse, outside of this fake relationship. But normalcy, it seemed, was not something Adrian would allow her to have. Adrian had no intention of following Elena that evening. In fact, he had told himself that whatever she did outside of their agreement was none of his business. And yet, when he spotted her across the room at the upscale restaurant he happened to be dining at, something in him snapped. She was sitting across from a man, Diego no doubt. The way she smiled, the way she laughed so effortlessly, the way her hand brushed against Diego's as they exchanged stories. Adrian had never known what jealousy felt like before. Now, he did. The ice in his glass clinked as he gripped it tighter, his jaw tightening. Nathan, seated beside him, noticed immediately. "You're staring, Adrian," he remarked casually, sipping his drink. Adrian didn't respond. Nathan followed his gaze, then smirked. "Ah, I see. You didn't mention Elena had other company tonight." Still, Adrian said nothing, but his grip on the glass tightened. When Diego leaned in slightly, placing a hand over Elena's, Adrian's body went rigid. Before Nathan could say another word, Adrian was already moving. He crossed the room with measured steps, each one fueled by something he didn't want to acknowledge. By the time he reached the table, both Elena and Diego looked up, startled by his presence. "You must be Diego," Adrian said, his voice smooth, but laced with something darker. "I've heard about you." Diego didn't flinch. He met Adrian's gaze with quiet confidence. "And I know who you are, Mr. Montgomery." The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Diego set his glass down, his eyes steady. "The question is, do you know what you really want?" Elena inhaled sharply, looking between the two men. Adrian didn't answer, but his silence spoke louder than any words could. The way his gaze never left hers, the way his presence alone demanded her attention. She knew. She knew he was angry. She knew he was jealous. And she hated it. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You don't own me, Adrian," she said, her voice firm. "You said this was just a deal, remember?" For the first time in a long time, Adrian had nothing to say. because for the first time, he was forced to acknowledge the truth. He didn't want to lose her. Lucas Delacroix had never been a man who handled defeat well. Losing Elena had been humiliating enough, but losing her to Adrian Montgomery, New York's most powerful and untouchable businessman, was a wound he refused to let heal. He wanted payback. Sitting in his penthouse, whiskey swirling in his glass, he scrolled through endless pictures of Adrian and Elena together, smiling at galas, walking into exclusive restaurants, leaving the Montgomery skyscraper. The media adored them, labeling them as the city's new power couple. Lucas clenched his jaw, his grip tightening around his glass. "She thinks she's safe with him," he muttered under his breath. "She thinks she's won." But he knew this world, and in this world, no one was untouchable. A slow, dangerous smile curled on his lips as an idea formed in his mind. If he couldn't have Elena, he would destroy her. The scandal broke the next morning. Tabloids, gossip websites, and even mainstream media outlets plastered their headlines with Elena's face. Elena Ramirez, New York's most ambitious gold digger? The articles were ruthless, painting her as a manipulative woman who had set her sights on Adrian Montgomery the moment she was free from her arranged marriage. Some headlines were even worse: sleeping her way to the top, from nobody to Montgomery's mistress, the untold story of Elena Ramirez. Accompanying the words were carefully curated photographs, some from the gala, some taken outside Adrian's penthouse, and a few of her with Diego, all edited to look more incriminating than they actually were. It was a full-scale attack, and it was working. Adrian stared at the screen in front of him, his expression unreadable. Nathan stood beside him, arms crossed. "Lucas," he muttered. "This has his name all over it." Adrian didn't respond. His jaw was clenched so tightly it ached, his hands curling into fists. He had seen plenty of scandals in his lifetime: fabricated lies, smear campaigns, and manipulative media tactics. It was how power worked in their world. But this was different. This was her. Nathan glanced at him. "What do you want to do?" Adrian finally spoke, his voice cold and sharp. "Find out who planted the story. Buy out every publication if you have to." Nathan nodded but hesitated. "And Elena?" Adrian's entire body tensed. He should have gone to her immediately, but he hadn't. Because for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. He had spent years building walls so high no one could touch him. But watching Elena's name being dragged through the mud felt different. It felt personal. Elena had already seen the article by the time Adrian arrived at the penthouse. She stood by the window, her phone still in her hands, her shoulders rigid. Adrian stepped inside, but she didn't turn around. He hated that. "Elena?" She let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head. "So, it's official. I'm New York's most ambitious gold digger." Adrian's fists clenched. "It's all lies. You know that." She finally turned to face him, her eyes glistening. "Do I?" His chest tightened at the look on her face. "You warned me about this," she continued. "You told me that being with you meant being under scrutiny, but I never thought it would feel like this." Her voice broke on the last word. Adrian took a step closer, his instincts screaming at him to fix this. But how? How did he undo something like this? "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Elena whispered. "People will always see me as nothing more than a gold digger." Adrian had fought wars in boardrooms, crushed billion-dollar deals, and taken down entire corporations. But standing in front of Elena, seeing her fight back tears, he had never felt so helpless in his life. Adrian Montgomery had faced countless battles in his career: corporate takeovers, cutthroat negotiations, billion-dollar deals. He had been challenged, undermined, and even betrayed by business rivals. But never before had he felt rage like this. The article was everywhere. It had spread like wildfire, staining Elena's name and dragging his own into the fire. The media dissected every detail, fueling the narrative that she was nothing more than an ambitious social climber who had manipulated her way into his life. And now, the consequences had arrived at his doorstep. Inside the Montgomery Enterprises boardroom, The tension was suffocating. The senior board members sat in their leather chairs, their expressions unreadable but firm. The air was thick with unspoken judgment. "Adrian," one of them finally spoke, his voice measured, "we need to talk about the situation." Adrian sat at the head of the table, fingers steepled together, his face unreadable. "We've worked hard to maintain the image of Montgomery Enterprises as a pillar of success, stability, and discipline," another member added. "This recent media storm, your association with Ms. Ramirez, has put that at risk." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You're suggesting what exactly?" One of the older board members, a man who had been with the company since his father's time, cleared his throat. "You need to distance yourself from her." The words landed like a slap. Adrian's gaze darkened. "We understand your personal affairs are your own," another voice chimed in. "But the company comes first. You've always known that." Adrian exhaled sharply, his patience thinning. "And if I refuse?" The room fell silent. Nathan Pierce, who had been standing off to the side, watching the exchange unfold, finally spoke. "They'll threaten to push you out, Adrian. They can't remove you, but they can make things very complicated." Adrian let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. He understood the weight of what they were saying. But there was one problem. He wasn't going to let them dictate his life. "This meeting is over," he said coldly, pushing back his chair. "Adrian." "I said it's over?" His tone brooked no argument. He turned on his heel and walked out, his blood boiling. There was only one place he needed to be right now. The ballroom was filled with New York's elite, the city's most powerful figures clinking glasses, exchanging deals with thinly veiled smiles. And at the center of it all stood Lucas Delacroix. Adrian spotted him immediately, holding a glass of champagne, laughing at something some socialite had said, as if he hadn't just tried to destroy Elena's life. The sight of him made Adrian's blood burn. He strode across the room, ignoring the curious glances and whispered murmurs that followed him. Lucas turned just as Adrian reached him, his lips curling into a smirk. "Well, if it isn't Montgomery himself," he drawled, "here to congratulate me on my excellent media strategy." Adrian didn't stop. He grabbed Lucas by the lapels of his tuxedo, shoving him backward against the nearest pillar. Gasps filled the room, glasses clinking as people turned in shock. "You think you can ruin her and I'd do nothing?" Adrian's voice was low, furious. Lucas chuckled, his composure unshaken. "She's just a nobody, Adrian. You, of all people, should understand that." Adrian's grip tightened. Lucas leaned in slightly, his voice dripping with mockery. "Or is this not about her at all? Is this just about the fact that I beat you at something for once?" That was it. Adrian's fist connected with Lucas's jaw, the impact sending him stumbling back. The room fell into stunned silence. Cameras flashed. Someone let out a startled scream. Lucas straightened, touching his bleeding lip, before grinning. "Oh, you're going to regret that." Adrian barely heard him. His pulse pounded in his ears. He turned on his heel, storming out of the ballroom, needing air, needing to be anywhere but here. Back at the penthouse, Elena was waiting. She had seen the news, the headlines, the video of him punching Lucas in front of hundreds of people. She looked at him, exasperation and disappointment flickering across her face. "You can't just go around hitting people because of me, Adrian," she said, her voice tight. He was still breathing heavily. "I had to do something." She shook her head. "You're not some street fighter. You're a businessman. And now, the world sees you as a man who lost control over a woman they already think isn't good enough for you." The words struck deeper than she intended, because they weren't true, but they hurt anyway. Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Why had he lost control like that? And more importantly, why did he care so much? Adrian Montgomery had spent the last 24 hours trying to clean up the mess he had made. The media was still ablaze with the scandal. His fight with Lucas had given the press even more to talk about, and while Nathan was working tirelessly to contain the damage, Adrian knew the storm wasn't going to pass easily. What infuriated him most wasn't the headlines or the board's discontent. It was Elena's disappointment. She had looked at him like he was someone she didn't recognize. And that That was worse than any business deal gone wrong. Adrian was in his office when the past came knocking. The door swung open, and before his assistant could announce her arrival, Isabella Romano strolled in like she owned the place. Adrian stiffened. It had been years, but he recognized her immediately. The cascading dark waves, the striking emerald eyes, the effortless elegance of a woman who had been born into wealth. But there was something different now. She carried herself with the same air of superiority, yet there was an underlying desperation she couldn't quite hide. "Adrian," she purred, her lips curling into a smile as if they were old lovers simply reconnecting. "It's been too long." He leaned back in his chair, his expression impassive. "Not long enough." She laughed, unfazed. "You always were dramatic." Adrian studied her carefully, already weary of whatever game she was playing. "What do you want, Isabella?" She perched on the edge of his desk, crossing her legs gracefully. "Come now. No warm welcome? No curiosity as to why I'm here?" His jaw tightened. "I can already guess. You made your choice years ago. Now you're back because it didn't work out the way you planned." For a split second, something flickered in her eyes, but she recovered quickly. "I made a mistake, Adrian. We both know I should have chosen you." Adrian didn't even blink. "You didn't, and now it's too late." Isabella tilted her head, amusement dancing in her gaze. "Is it?" She picked up a magazine from his desk, the latest tabloid, the one with Elena's face splashed across the cover. "Because from what I see, you're involved in a mess, and I can't help but wonder." She trailed a manicured nail over Elena's photo. "Is this really who you've replaced me with?" Adrian's entire body went rigid. Isabella smirked, knowing she had struck a nerve. "A woman with no background, no power, no standing?" "Oh, Adrian," she sighed, feigning pity. "You could have anyone. Why waste yourself on someone so ordinary?" Elena had only planned to drop by Adrian's office briefly. She knew he was busy dealing with the fallout of the scandal, and after their last conversation, she wasn't sure where they stood. But as she stepped inside, she wasn't prepared for what she saw. A woman, beautiful, elegant, the kind of woman who belonged in Adrian's world, was perched comfortably on his desk, her lips curled in a smirk as she stared at him. And then, the words left her mouth. "Why waste yourself on someone so ordinary?" Elena felt the impact like a physical blow. Her heart clenched, but she refused to show weakness. Clearing her throat, she stepped forward, making her presence known. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Both Adrian and Isabella turned. Isabella gave her a slow, appraising look before letting out a soft laugh. "Oh, and here she is." Adrian was on his feet in an instant, his gaze shifting between the two women. "Elena!" But Isabella was faster. She turned fully toward Elena, eyes gleaming with barely concealed condescension. "I was just getting to know Adrian's latest project," she said smoothly. Elena's spine straightened. "And who might you be?" Isabella's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Isabella Romano, Adrian's ex-fiancée." Elena barely reacted, though inside her stomach twisted. Adrian had been engaged? He had never mentioned it. Isabella leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "I must say, it's impressive. I didn't think someone like you could last this long in his world." Adrian took a step forward, his tone sharp. "Enough, Isabella." But Elena didn't flinch. She met Isabella's gaze head-on. "And yet, here I am," she said evenly. For a moment, the air between them was thick with silent challenge. Then Isabella simply smirked. "For now." She turned back to Adrian, placing a hand on his chest in a way that was far too familiar. "You know you deserve better," she murmured. Elena had heard enough. She didn't wait for Adrian to defend her. She simply turned and walked out. Adrian cursed under his breath, shoving Isabella's hand away before following. But Elena was already gone. By the time she stepped into the elevator, her mind was racing. For weeks she had fought against the doubts clawing at her. She had tried to believe she belonged in Adrian's world, that she wasn't just some temporary distraction. But today, hearing it spoken aloud by a woman who did belong in his world, she wasn't so sure anymore. The penthouse felt different that morning. The air was heavier, silence filling the vast space that once echoed with the soft hum of Elena's presence. The scent of her perfume still lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable, like a ghost of something slipping through his fingers. Adrian stood in the middle of the living room, staring at her suitcase. She was leaving, and he didn't know how to stop her. Elena zipped up the last of her bags, her hands shaking slightly. This wasn't easy. She had fought so hard to convince herself that she could belong in Adrian's world, that she could endure the whispers, the judgment, the constant reminders that she would never truly be enough for a man like him. But Isabella had said out loud what had already been haunting her for weeks. You could have anyone. Why waste yourself on someone so ordinary? The words rang in her mind, and no matter how much she wanted to ignore them, she couldn't. She had let herself believe in the fantasy, but reality had come crashing down. Adrian belonged to a world of power, wealth, and ruthless ambition, and she was just a woman trying to survive in a world that wasn't made for her. A sharp knock on the door made her flinch, then his voice, low, controlled. Elena. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing herself. When she opened the door, Adrian was standing there, looking at her as if he had already lost her. His gaze flickered to the suitcase, and his entire body tensed. Where are you going? Elena swallowed, trying to find the right words. I need to leave, Adrian. His jaw clenched. That's not an answer. She exhaled, gripping the handle of her suitcase. I'm going where I belong. His eyes darkened. You belong here. With me. A sharp pain twisted in her chest. Do I? She whispered. Adrian stepped closer, his voice lowering. Yes. Her heart clenched at the certainty in his tone, but she needed more than words. She needed something Adrian had never been willing to give. Adrian, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you love me? He didn't answer, and that silence was enough. Elena blinked back the sting in her eyes and gave him a sad smile. That's what I thought. She turned to walk past him, but his hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Elena. His voice was hoarse, desperate, like he was holding on to something slipping from his grasp. She turned to face him, her gaze unwavering. You don't get to keep me with words, Adrian. You don't get to hold on to me because you don't want to lose something you think belongs to you. If you can't love me, then let me go. Adrian's grip faltered. He could see it in her eyes. She was done fighting, and he didn't know how to fight for her. So he did the one thing he never thought he'd do. He let her go. The door closed behind her. Adrian stood frozen in place, staring at the space where she had just been. His penthouse, his sanctuary, had never felt so empty. The silence suffocated him. He moved to the bar, poured himself a drink, and downed it in one go. But it didn't numb anything. For the first time in his life, Adrian Montgomery felt truly powerless. Nathan found him hours later, sitting in the dark, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. Adrian didn't look up as his oldest friend sat across from him. You let her leave, Nathan said, his voice even. Adrian's fingers tightened around his glass. She wanted to go? Nathan scoffed. And you just let her? Adrian didn't respond. Nathan leaned forward. You don't see it, do you? Adrian finally looked up, his eyes cold. See what? Nathan sighed. You don't get to love someone if you can't let go of your past. You can't ask her to stay when you're still trapped by your own fears. Adrian let out a bitter laugh. What do you know about love, Nathan? His friend didn't flinch. I know that if you don't do something, you're going to lose her forever. Adrian said nothing. Nathan shook his head and stood. You built an empire, Adrian. You've won battles no one thought you could. But for the first time, you're facing something real, and you have no idea how to fight for it. He turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. Figure it out. Before it's too late, Adrian sat there for a long time staring into the darkness. The empire he built, the control he fought to keep, the power he never let slip through his fingers. None of it mattered, not when the only thing he wanted was walking away from him. His grip tightened around his glass before he finally whispered the words he had been too afraid to say out loud. I need to get her back. The news spread like wildfire. Adrian Montgomery, the man who had built an empire on calculated risks and ruthless ambition, had just walked away from the biggest deal of his career. $1 billion acquisition, something that would have cemented his name even further among the titans of Wall Street, was now nothing more than a missed opportunity. And the reason? A woman. Elena sat frozen at the small cafe where she worked, staring at the newspaper headline Nathan had just handed her. Montgomery abandons $1 billion deal? For love? Her fingers trembled slightly as she read the article. It detailed how Adrian had refused to sign the final contract, despite months of negotiations, despite the fact that this deal had been his obsession for years. Her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't possible. Adrian had built his life around power and control. He never let emotions interfere with business. He never walked away from a deal. So why would he do this? Nathan leaned back against the chair across from her, watching her reaction carefully. I thought you should know, he said simply. Elena forced herself to swallow. Why are you telling me this? Nathan arched an eyebrow. Because you need to understand something, Elena. Adrian is many things, stubborn, arrogant, emotionally stunted, but he's not the kind of man who makes reckless decisions. If he walked away from that deal, it's because he finally realized what's truly important to him. Elena looked away, trying to process it all. Could it be true? Had Adrian really changed? Adrian didn't bother knocking. When Elena opened the door, her breath caught in her throat. He looked different. Not the powerful CEO who commanded rooms with a single glance. Not the untouchable billionaire who had once viewed love as nothing more than a weakness. He looked raw. There was no tailored suit, no carefully curated mask of indifference. Just a man who had come to fight for the only thing that mattered. You walked away from the deal, Elena said, voice barely above a whisper. Adrian exhaled, his gaze searching hers. Yeah. Why? His jaw tensed. Because I've spent my entire life chasing the wrong things. And I won't make that mistake again. Elena folded her arms, trying to keep her emotions in check. So you think giving up money suddenly proves something? That it makes up for everything? No, Adrian admitted, stepping closer. But it's a start. She didn't step back, but she didn't soften either. You can't just throw money away and expect me to believe you've changed. Adrian let out a bitter chuckle. You think this is about money? I could lose everything tomorrow, and it wouldn't matter, Elena. None of it means a damn thing if I don't have you. Elena's breath hitched. She had imagined 100 scenarios where Adrian would come back to her. Apologies, grand gestures, even desperate pleas. But she had never expected this. I've lived my entire life believing that power was the only thing that mattered, Adrian continued, voice rough. That love was just another transaction, something people used as leverage. He took another step closer, his voice dropping to something almost vulnerable. But then you happened, and suddenly none of it made sense anymore. Elena swallowed hard, her resolve wavering. Still, she hesitated. Adrian. No, he cut her off gently. Let me finish. His hands curled into fists, like he was holding himself back. I know I've hurt you. I know I've made you feel like you were just temporary. Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. But you're not. He reached for her hand, his grip strong yet careful, like he was afraid she might pull away. I love you, Elena. His voice was raw, honest in a way she had never heard before. I love you more than I have ever loved anything in this world, and I know that now. The words hit her like a tidal wave. She had dreamed of hearing them, had longed for them in the quiet of night when doubt crept in. But now that they were here, she didn't know if she could trust them. She looked up into his eyes, searching. Adrian Montgomery had always been unreadable, a fortress built too high for anyone to climb. But now, the walls were gone, and for the first time, she saw a man who wasn't afraid anymore. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. Could she believe him? Could she risk it all again? As she stood there, staring into the eyes of the man who had once broken her, a single question echoed in her mind. Is this time different? Elena sat on the worn-out couch of her small apartment, staring at the city lights flickering through the window. The past few days had been a whirlwind. Adrian's confession, his shocking decision to walk away from a billion-dollar deal, and now, the question that haunted her. Could she trust him? She wanted to believe that he had changed, that the man who once saw love as nothing more than a liability had finally learned what it meant to give his heart to someone. But doubt was a stubborn thing, and it clung to her like a shadow. Then came the knock at her door. She hesitated before opening it. Standing there, dressed impeccably as always, was Isabella Romano, the last person she wanted to see. Elena didn't invite her in, but that didn't stop Isabella from stepping forward, a knowing smirk on her lips. "You look surprised to see me," Isabella said smoothly, her eyes scanning Elena's small apartment as if she were evaluating something insignificant. "I thought we should talk." "There's nothing to talk about," Elena said, keeping her voice steady. Isabella laughed softly. "Oh, but there is. You see, I know Adrian better than anyone. I know how his mind works. And I thought it was only fair to warn you before you get your hopes up." Elena folded her arms. "Warn me about what?" "About him." Isabella tilted her head, feigning concern. "Adrian doesn't love anyone but himself, Elena. He never has, and he never will. You're just an experiment to him, a challenge, something different from the women he usually entertains. But make no mistake, when he gets bored, he will walk away, just like he always does." Elena's hands clenched at her sides, but she refused to let Isabella see how much her words affected her. "That's not true," she said, but even she could hear the hesitation in her own voice. Isabella smirked. "Oh, darling, you think you're special? You think because he threw away a deal, suddenly he's a changed man? Please, I stood in your place once. I was the woman who thought she could be the exception." Elena swallowed hard. Was Isabella right? Could Adrian really change? Or was she just fooling herself? Hours later, Elena sat in silence, her thoughts a storm inside her mind. She didn't know what to believe anymore. That was when her phone buzzed. It was Nathan. "You need to hear this," he said without preamble. "Lucas Delacroix just got arrested." Elena sat up straight. "What?" "The truth came out. He's been running fraudulent investments for years. The feds finally caught up with him, and guess what? His involvement in planting false stories about you. It's all over the news now. The press is retracting everything." Elena's chest tightened, so the world would finally see she wasn't a gold digger. The damage was already done, but at least now, the truth was out. Nathan hesitated before adding, "You know, Adrian had something to do with that. He made sure Lucas's crimes got exposed. He's been protecting you even when you didn't know it." Elena closed her eyes. Everything she thought she knew was unraveling. Adrian had given up power. He had fought for her. And now, he had destroyed the one person who had tried to ruin her. But was it enough? Could she trust him? Or was she just setting herself up for heartbreak all over again? As she stared at the city skyline, one question echoed in her mind. If I give Adrian a chance, will he break me again? The world had finally seen the truth. Lucas Delacroix was exposed for the fraud he was, and the weight of his crimes had shattered his once impenetrable image. His fall from grace was swift and brutal, and with it, the public's perception of Adrian Montgomery shifted. For the first time in years, Adrian was no longer just a ruthless billionaire. He was a man who had fought for what mattered to him, a man who had risked everything, not for power, not for wealth, but for love. And yet, despite his victories, there was still an emptiness inside him, because Elena was gone. When Elena arrived at Adrian's penthouse, she hesitated before knocking. The last time she was here, she had walked away, convinced that leaving was the only way to protect herself. Now she wasn't so sure anymore. Adrian opened the door, surprise flickering in his dark eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then finally he stepped aside, silently inviting her in. Elena took a deep breath and walked inside. The penthouse was the same, but something about it felt different, warmer, less empty, or maybe it was just her. Adrian watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. "I wasn't expecting you to come back." "I wasn't expecting to either," Elena admitted. A hint of a smile touched his lips, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Why are you here?" She swallowed hard. "Because I needed to know if you meant it. Everything you said, everything you did, if it was real." Adrian exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Elena, I didn't fight for you because of some game. I didn't give up everything because I had to. I did it because I love you. Because I can't imagine a life without you." She looked up at him, searching his face for any trace of doubt. "You love me now. But what happens when things aren't perfect? When life gets messy? When I'm not the polished, elegant woman the world expects you to be with?" Adrian stepped closer, his voice low, steady. "Then I'll love you even more." Elena felt tears welling in her eyes. "You can't promise that." "I can," he said firmly, "and I will." She didn't realize she was crying until he reached out, his fingers brushing away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. For so long she had been afraid of being not enough, afraid of being just another chapter in someone else's story. But Adrian wasn't just saying the words. She could feel them. She was no longer a woman fighting to be seen. She was the woman he chose to fight for. Elena let out a shaky breath. "I don't want to be afraid anymore." Adrian cupped her face, his gaze dark with emotion. "Then don't be." And when he kissed her, it wasn't the desperate, frantic kind of kiss that came from fear or uncertainty. It was the kind that spoke of forever. The waves rolled onto the shore, their rhythmic crashing against the sand filling the air with a peaceful melody. The salty breeze carried the warmth of the setting sun, casting a golden glow over everything it touched. Adrian Montgomery walked barefoot along the beach, his fingers intertwined with Elena's. He had spent years chasing power, controlling every aspect of his life, building an empire that once meant everything to him. Now, none of it mattered, because here, in this quiet coastal town, standing beside the woman he loved, he had found something far greater than wealth. He had found happiness. It had been a year since Adrian had walked away from his empire. The world had been shocked when he stepped down from his role as CEO, giving up the billion-dollar business he had spent his entire life building. His competitors had called him a fool. His investors had panicked. But Adrian had never felt more certain about a decision in his entire life. He had spent too long letting power define him, allowing fear to dictate his choices. And when he had nearly lost Elena, he realized that no amount of money or control would ever replace what she had given him. Love. Unconditional, messy, imperfect love. "You're quiet," Elena murmured, looking up at him as they walked. Adrian turned to her, a soft smile on his lips. "Just thinking." "About what?" she asked. He stopped, gently pulling her close. "About how, for the first time in my life, I don't want anything more than what I have right now." Elena's eyes softened. "No regrets?" "None," he said without hesitation. "Not about leaving the company, not about walking away from that life. The only thing I would have regretted was losing you." Elena reached up, brushing her fingers along his jawline. "You never really lost me, Adrian. You just needed to find yourself first." He let out a quiet chuckle. I think you found me before I even knew I was lost. She smiled, standing on her toes to press a soft kiss against his lips. I think we found each other. The sun dipped lower, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. They stood there, barefoot in the sand, the ocean stretching endlessly before them. A year ago, Adrian had believed love was a weakness, that caring too much only led to pain. Now, as he held Elena in his arms, he knew the truth. Love wasn't a weakness. It was the one thing that had made him stronger. He pulled her in closer, whispering against her hair. Sometimes, true love isn't about finding the perfect person. It's about finding the one who makes you want to be the best version of yourself. And as the waves continued to roll in, Adrian knew this was only the beginning of their forever. At its core, this story isn't just about wealth, power, or status. It's about the transformative power of love. Adrian Montgomery, a man who once believed that control was the key to survival, learned that true strength lies in vulnerability, trust, and the courage to love without fear. Elena Ramirez, a woman who refused to be a pawn in someone else's game, showed that self-worth isn't defined by status or wealth, but by the strength to stand up for oneself and fight for happiness. Love isn't about possession. It's not about control. It's about choosing someone every single day, even when things aren't perfect. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is let go of fear and take a leap of faith. Because the right person doesn't complete you, they inspire you to be the best version of yourself. This story reminds us that no amount of money can buy genuine connection, loyalty, or a love that truly lasts. The walls we build to protect ourselves may also be the ones that keep us from experiencing life's greatest joys. So tell me, what did this story make you feel? Did it change the way you see love, power, or sacrifice? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories that stir the heart and soul. Thank you for being here. Your support means everything,